follow all this naturally at Tarpley.net, Twitter feed, Webster G. Tarpley. Now, one of the bright spots in this entire thing is the nurses' union. The nurses' union, it seems to me, are the vanguard of this entire thing. They had the clearest ideas. They're a well-constituted union. They fought valiantly against the reactionary Schwarzenegger in California, and they're out there with their sons. They're the ones that say, tax Wall Street transactions. Right on to the nurses. That's what we need. A few more points like that, and we can really go someplace, like student loan amnesty now paid for by 1% Wall Street sales tax. That, I think, is going to be it. So this was discussed on Olbermann, Elliot Spitzer. They all agreed that the transaction tax was cool. Great. That's the kind of progress that we can make with these demands. But now we want to go to the scene. We want to go up to New York City and, if possible, get a report from our friend Eric Draitzer, who has been observing what's going on. Eric, are you there?
Yes, I am. How are you, Webster?
Wonderful. Thank you for coming on. Now, we have about 20 minutes. We have two segments, so why don't you take it away? Give us the overview, and I know you were part of an important theoretical discussion last night at the INN studio, so tell us about that, too, in any order you like.
All right, so then I think that we'll begin with the events of Wednesday that hopefully everybody saw that on the news. So what happened on Wednesday, I got down to Zuccotti Park at about 4 o'clock, and it was the usual assembling of the hippies and the drum circles and the various other groups which have been making appearances there. MoveOn.org was conspicuously there. Code Pink was conspicuously there, as well as some other groups that may or may not have their roots directly in the foundation-funded left. However, the events of Wednesday really exploded at about 5:30, I would say, when the march that included the various large unions in New York City came down to Zuccotti Park, all the way down Broadway, down to Church and beyond. And I would say that in total, I think a conservative estimate would be about 25,000 people. I've heard estimates ranging from 20 to 50. I think 50 is probably excessive. So I would say about 25 to 30,000 people marching. Now, who was there? We saw the TWU, the Transit Workers Union. We saw the United Federation of Teachers. We saw the SEIU and the various other political organizations which have a base here in New York City, such as Party for Socialist Liberation and groups like that. Now, this march, I will tell you, this was the largest gathering of people in one place protesting against something that I have seen really since about 2002, since the anti-Iraq war movement. The anti-war movement, which Obama destroyed, is back, and the anti-Wall Street movement is back, and or rather, it's here. And what you had talked about before with regard to the notion of the mass strike, this is the key. This is what we saw on Wednesday. We saw the mass strike. Now, the mass strike does not necessarily have to have one specific programmatic demand. I think that that's unrealistic. Instead, each group brings their demands, but they gather together in protest against the system of control. And that's what we saw. Now, the events that people would have seen on the news, specifically with regard to the violence that broke out, this is something that bears analysis. I actually spoke with some people. What I witnessed firsthand, I'll tell you, what I witnessed were various groups which were attempting to incite the police. Okay, chanting slogans, profanities, whatever, attempting to incite the New York Police Department. From my eyewitness point of view, the police conducted themselves in a very professional manner, in a courteous manner, and were, I have to say, thoughtful, essentially. I don't think there's any way around that. The police were pretty good. The groups that actually took part in the violence, so I have eyewitnesses tell me, definitely Black Bloc. Black Bloc makes an appearance, the Black Bloc anarchists, and what they did was they staged what can be called, I guess, the destruction of these barriers. That is to say, inciting people to jump the barriers, which were there for the protection of the protesters themselves, jumping over the barriers, getting in the faces of the police, and attempting to incite that sort of a violence. There were other anarchist groups who I don't think are actually black bloc, but rather, probably some useful idiots, as you might like to say, or dupes who may believe in propaganda by deed or some other sort of nonsense. But this is where the violence came from. The violence was definitely not incited by the New York Police Department, and it was definitely not incited by the Occupy Wall Street movement. This was really radical elements, and I would actually argue agents infiltrated or placed within the movement, within the protest, to attempt to discredit it. So that's what we saw. And so anybody who watched the news and saw this whole thing about the protest becoming violent, they did not become violent. It was a tiny little element within the protest that was there designed to discredit them that had become violent. Now,
so that's a good lesson. Anarchists are police agents, and that's it.
And what's important, too, and I will back away from your point just a little bit, there are a lot of different anarchist groups or groups that call themselves anarchists there. The ones who incited the violence were the Black Bloc. We know they have a long history of acts of provocation as provocateurs, as agents. The other anarchists, these are people who like the punk music and enjoy the anarchist thought of, whoever, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon or Bakunin or whoever their favorite, Emma Goldman, whoever their favorite anarchist is. These are mostly kids who are, wrapped up in notions of the 19th century. These are not people who are necessarily inciting to violence. But the Black Bloc, that's who we saw, that's who's there, and I saw them yesterday as well. I was down there yesterday, and they're very easy to spot. If you can't see a person's face and it's covered with a black bandana, that's an agent, or at the very least, a total dupe working for agents.
Okay.
And so going beyond that, though, this mass strike, this is something that people need to pay attention to because based on what I saw and based on my understanding of what we saw in Wisconsin, this was much larger and this was much more comprehensive because unlike in Wisconsin where there was one concentrated enemy that is Governor Walker, in New York, you did not have that. This was not merely concentrated against Mayor Bloomberg and Cutts or against Governor Cuomo or anything like this. This was a mass protest against a general system, and that is the system of Wall Street control over public unions. This is important. This is the union movement. This is what we've been looking for. This is what we've been hoping for, and this is what we saw. And the scope of it was dramatic. And I was down there again yesterday, and the effects of it were still being felt there. You now have a permanent union presence down at Zuccotti Park. I saw union representatives from construction workers from Boston, construction workers who were working at Ground Zero, construction workers who from all over the 5 boroughs, from all over New York. So there is a union presence there now, and this, I think, is essential because it counterbalances.
Hang on, Eric. That's the end of our segment. We'll be back in a minute.